Imagine you are one of only 1,000 people carrying an entire branch of humanity's genetic tree. Every marriage decision you make matters at a species-wide level. Every child born is either a preservation or a loss. Every elder who dies takes with them knowledge that cannot be replaced. That is not a hypothetical. That is the reality of the Hadza people of Tanzania, and their DNA is what we are going to talk about today. But before we get to the genetics, I want you to actually sit inside this experience for a moment. You live near a lake called Eyasi. The sun comes up and you wake up in a shelter made of branches and grass. There is no alarm clock other than the birds. There is no breakfast waiting in a refrigerator. If you want to eat, you walk into the bush and you find food. You dig for tubers with a digging stick. You track honey by following a bird called the honey guide. You hunt with a bow and arrows that your father taught you to make when you were old enough to hold them without cutting yourself. And you speak a language that only your people speak, a language full of clicks. A language that researchers have called a linguistic isolate, meaning it is related to no other known language on Earth. You are not a remnant of the past. You are not a living museum exhibit. You are a person, right now, in the 21st century, carrying a genetic legacy so deep and so improbable that when scientists first looked at your DNA, they had to sit back and ask a very uncomfortable question. How do you exist at all? Let's start with the number. When people say the Hadza are one of the last hunter-gatherer populations in Africa, what they usually leave out is how small this population actually is. Estimates put the total Hadza population at around 1,200 to 1,300 people. And within that number, only about 200 to 300 are still living a fully traditional hunter-gatherer lifestyle. Let that sink in. 200 to 300 people. In genetic terms, that is a breeding population so small that it barely qualifies as a population at all. Now, you might be thinking, okay, 1,200 people isn't that small. There are plenty of endangered animal species with fewer individuals and they survive. But human genetics doesn't work like that. When you have a population of only 1,000 people, you don't actually have 1,000 potential partners. You have roughly half that, minus the elderly, minus the children, minus close relatives. What you're left with is something geneticists call the effective breeding population. For the Hadza, that number has been estimated to be shockingly low. We're talking about fewer than 100 breeding pairs at various points in their history. And here is the brutal mathematical reality. A population of fewer than 100 breeding pairs should, under most models, collapse into something called inbreeding depression within about 50 generations. Inbreeding depression is what happens when close relatives reproduce over and over. Harmful recessive mutations start piling up, fertility drops, infant mortality rises, immune systems weaken, the population shrinks further. And once that spiral starts, it is almost impossible to stop. 50 generations. For humans, that's roughly 1,500 years. The Hadza have been around far, far longer than that. Their own mitochondrial DNA tells a story that goes back tens of thousands of years. So how are they still here? How have they avoided the genetic collapse that should have erased them long ago? That is the question that drew geneticists to Lake Eyasi. That is the question that has produced some of the most startling DNA results in modern anthropology. And the answer, when it finally emerged, forced scientists to rethink what they thought they knew about human survival, about isolation, about what a population of 1,000 people can carry. Let me ask you something. If you spoke a language with click consonants, and someone told you there was another group of people thousands of kilometers away who also spoke with clicks, what would you assume? You would assume you shared ancestry. That's the intuitive answer. That's what linguists assumed for decades. The Hadza of Tanzania use clicks. The San people of southern Africa, the Khoisan, also use clicks. For a long time, the working theory was simple. These two groups must be related. They must be the last remnants of an ancient click-speaking population that once stretched across the African continent. It made sense. It was elegant. It was also completely wrong. In 2007, geneticist Sarah Tishkoff and her colleagues published a study in the journal Molecular Biology and Evolution. The title was History of Click-Speaking Populations of Africa Inferred from mtDNA and Y Chromosome Genetic Variation. What they did was analyze the mitochondrial DNA of the Hadza and several other click-speaking populations, including the San and Sendawe. And what they found was not what anyone expected. The Hadza and the San are not closely related, not at all. Their mitochondrial lineages are deeply, profoundly different. When Tishkoff looked at the maternal DNA of the Hadza, she found something remarkable. The Hadza carry a subclade of mitochondrial haplogroup L4, called L4b2. And here is the part that matters. This exact subclade is found nowhere else on Earth. No other population carries it. It dates back approximately 40,000 years. 40,000 years. Think about what that means. This is a maternal lineage that has been passed down, mother to daughter, for roughly 1,600 generations. And it exists today only among the Hadza. It is a living thread that stretches back to a time before agriculture, before writing, before the last ice age reached its peak, before the world as we know it. And it is still breathing. It is still walking around near Lake Eyasi, speaking a language with clicks that no one outside the Hadza can fully master. The San, by contrast, carry their own ancient lineages, but they are not the same lineages. The genetic distance between the Hadza and the San is consistent with a split that happened more than 50,000 years ago, if they ever shared ancestry at all. Which means one of two things. Either the click consonants in Hadzane and the San languages evolved independently, in a striking case of convergent evolution, like wings in bats and birds, or they share a common ancestor so distant that no trace of it survives in the DNA beyond the faintest statistical echo. Both possibilities are staggering. Clicks evolving twice in Africa would be a linguistic miracle. But a shared ancestry from more than 50,000 years ago would make the Hadza and the San two surviving branches of the deepest split in modern human history. Either way, the Hadza are not who the textbooks said they were. And the surprises didn't stop with the mitochondria. When researchers looked at the Y chromosome of Hadza men, they found another layer of rarity. The dominant Y DNA haplogroup among the Hadza is B2b. Now, if that string of letters doesn't mean much to you, fair enough. But in genetic terms, B2b is one of the oldest and rarest Y chromosome lineages still found in modern humans. It is deeply African. It branched off from other major Y lineages tens of thousands of years ago. And while it is found in a few scattered populations across the continent, the Hadza carry it at frequencies rarely seen anywhere else. What that means is that both the maternal and paternal lineages of the Hadza are ancient. Not one or the other. Both. That's unusual. Most populations have a mix of old and new. Most populations show evidence of migrations, invasions, intermarriage, replacement. The Hadza do not. The Hadza look, from the outside, like a population that has been doing its own thing for an incomprehensibly long time. They are a genetic island. Not a literal island, of course. They live on the African mainland. But genetically, they are as isolated as if they lived on a remote archipelago in the middle of the Pacific. And yet they are still here, still healthy, still reproducing. Which brings us back to the question we started with. How? Before I answer that, I want you to try to feel something. I want you to imagine that every single person you are related to, every cousin, every aunt, every grandparent, every distant relative you've never met but who shares your last name or your mother's eyes, all of them, the entire extended web of your kinship, is 1,000 people. That's it. No one else on Earth shares your specific genetic signature. If your people vanish, that signature vanishes. The story it tells ends. And you know this. Not because you read it in a scientific paper, but because you learned it from your elders. You learned that your people are few. You learned that your survival depends on careful decisions about who marries whom. You learned that the rules are not arbitrary. They are not religious taboos. They are survival mechanisms encoded in social structure. For the Hadza, marriage is not strictly about love, though love certainly exists. It is about maintaining genetic health. The Hadza practice what anthropologists call exogamy. That means they marry outside their immediate clan, and they are careful about it. There are customs, traditions, and social pressures that steer young people toward partners in other Hadza bands, partners who are not close relatives. The entire social structure is, in a sense, a living genetic algorithm. It ensures that the effective breeding population is maximized. It ensures that inbreeding is kept low, and it works. When researchers compared the Hadza genome to the genomes of larger, more isolated farming populations in similar environments, they found something that sounds impossible. The Hadza show less inbreeding, less genetic collapse. A population of 1,200 hunter-gatherers is healthier, genetically, than many farming communities 10 times its size. The math said they should be gone. The social structure said, no, we have a way, and that way has worked for 40,000 years. But there's a deeper mystery here, one that pulls at the edges of what we understand about human history. In 2017, a landmark study was published in the journal Cell, The lead author was Pontus Skoglund, and the title was Reconstructing Prehistoric African Population Structure. This study analyzed ancient and modern DNA from across Africa, and what it revealed was a hidden landscape of human diversity that had been largely erased from the record. Buried in that genetic landscape was a distinct hunter-gatherer ancestry cluster, a signature that did not match Bantu-speaking farmers, did not match Nilotic herders, did not match the San. This was something else. And the closest living representatives of this ancient cluster are the Hadza. What Skoglund and his colleagues found was that the ancestors of the Hadza were once part of a much larger, much more widespread population of hunter-gatherers who lived across East Africa before the arrival of agriculture. These people were not marginal. They were not a small band eking out a living in a desert. They were a major human population distributed across a vast region, connected by trade, marriage, and movement. And then something happened. Around 5,000 to 4,000 years ago, a wave of agricultural expansion moved through Africa south of the Sahara. Bantu-speaking farmers, equipped with crops, iron tools, and larger populations, expanded out of West Africa and across the continent. At roughly the same time, Nilotic-speaking herders moved south with their cattle. In 2019, a study by Mary Prendergast and colleagues, published in the journal Science, reconstructed this process in detail. The title was Ancient DNA Reveals a Multi-Step Spread of the First Herders into Sub-Equatorial Africa. And what it showed was that these expansions did not simply push hunter-gatherers out. They absorbed them, mixed with them, diluted them. Over generations, the original hunter-gatherer populations of East Africa were swallowed into the expanding farmer and herder gene pools. Their languages were replaced. Their traditions were lost. Their genetic signatures became faint background noise in the genomes of their descendants. All except for a few isolated pockets. The Hadza, the Sandawe, a handful of others. They are the ones who refused to farm, refused to herd, refused to be absorbed. They held to their language, their lifestyle, their identity. And because they held, their DNA survived. That is what the Hadza are. Not a population that has always been small. A population that was once part of a huge and ancient human network, and is now reduced to a remnant. And that remnant, by sheer chance and cultural resilience, carries genetic information that the rest of us lost a long time ago. Now, I want you to think about what that means for you. Not for the Hadza, for you. If you are sitting here watching this, chances are your ancestors were farmers or herders at some point in the last few thousand years. Your genetic makeup is a blend, a mixture, a product of those ancient expansions. And that's fine. That's how human history works. But there is a cost to that blending. Every time two populations merge, the rarer lineages get diluted. The deep ancestry gets overwritten. The old stories get lost. The Hadza, by refusing to merge, by refusing to farm or herd or adopt outside languages, preserved something that the rest of us lost. And when you look at their DNA, you are not just looking at their ancestry, you are looking at a window into your own past. A past before agriculture. A past before the great human mixing. A past that you carry only in fragments while they carry it whole. That is why they matter. That is why their survival matters. Not because they are exotic, not because they are a curiosity, but because they are a living archive of humanity's oldest self. But here is where the story gets even stranger. In 2018, a team led by geneticist George Perry published a study in the journal Genome Biology and Evolution. The title was Adaptive Gene Expression Divergence Between the Hadza and Sandawe. What they were looking at was not just ancestry, but adaptation. How had the Hadza genome been shaped by selection over thousands of years? What specific genes had been favored in their environment? And what they found raises a question that still puzzles geneticists today. The Hadza show selection for lactase-related genes. Lactase is the enzyme that allows mammals to digest milk sugar. In most human populations, lactase production shuts down after weaning, because, historically, humans did not drink milk as adults. But in populations with a long history of dairying, such as Europeans, some Middle Easterners, and some African herders, mutations have arisen that keep lactase production going throughout life. This is called lactase persistence, and it is one of the clearest examples of recent human evolution. The Hadza do not drink milk, they do not keep cattle, they are not herders. They are hunter-gatherers, and yet their genome shows evidence of selection for lactase-related genes. Why? One possibility is that the Hadza carry this genetic signature from an ancient time when some of their ancestors did practice dairying, or at least had contact with herders, and the genes persisted in their gene pool even after the cultural practice was abandoned. Another possibility is that these genes have some other function we don't fully understand yet. Either way, it is a clue. The Hadza genome is not static. It has been shaped by contact, by environment, by thousands of years of selection. They are not frozen in time. They are a living population that evolved alongside everyone else, just in a different direction. And then there is the immune system. The Hadza live in an environment teeming with tropical pathogens, malaria, parasitic worms, bacterial infections. Their immune system is under constant pressure, and their genome reflects that. Researchers have found that the Hadza carry unusual HLA variants. HLA stands for human leukocyte antigen. It is a set of genes that helps the immune system recognize and fight off pathogens. Different populations have different HLA profiles, shaped by the specific diseases they have encountered. The Hadza's HLA variants are distinctive. They are adapted to the specific parasite load of their environment. And here is the thing that matters for the rest of us. The Hadza's immune adaptations may hold clues to treating or preventing diseases that affect millions of people. Their genome is not just a historical archive. It is a medical library, a repository of genetic solutions to biological problems that modern medicine is still trying to solve. Every person in that population of 1,200 carries information that could, in theory, save lives far beyond the shores of Lake Eyasi. And yet they are barely studied, barely protected, barely supported. You can see the stakes now, can't you? You can see what would be lost if this population were to disappear. This is not a matter of preserving a cultural artifact. It is a matter of protecting a biological treasure. The Hadza are one of the last reservoirs of human genetic diversity. And genetic diversity is the raw material of survival. Let's go back to the daily life aspect, because I want you to feel what it is like to be part of this legacy without romanticizing it. The Hadza diet is roughly 80% wild collected food. Tubers dug from the ground with a sharpened stick. Honey gathered from wild hives, often with the help of a bird called the honey guide, which has a remarkable habit of leading humans to honey in exchange for the leftovers. Meat from hunting, berries, baobab fruit, wild greens. There is no agriculture, no cultivation, no pastoralism. Traditionally, no metal tools. Just knowledge. Deep, detailed, precise knowledge of the landscape, the seasons, the animals, the plants. This is not a simple life. It is a highly skilled life. A life that requires years of training, observation, and memory. And it has sustained the Hadza for tens of thousands of years. The population has remained remarkably stable, between approximately 1,000 and 1,500 people for thousands of years. No explosions, no collapses, just a steady state. In an era of boom and bust, of overpopulation and resource depletion, the Hadza have achieved something that modern civilization has not. A sustainable population, a stable relationship with their environment, and they have done it without agriculture, without industry, without technology. You might be thinking, well, that's survivorship bias. Maybe they only seem stable because they got lucky. Maybe their environment was unusually rich. And yes, the area around Lake Eyasi is productive. But stability over thousands of years is not luck. It is a system. It is choices made generation after generation. It is cultural knowledge that regulates population growth, resource use, and social behavior. It is, in other words, a civilization. Not a civilization of stone monuments and written records, but a civilization of sustainable living. And that civilization is now under pressure. Land loss, encroachment by farmers and herders, tourism, government policies that want the Hadza to settle in permanent villages and send their children to school, disease, and the slow, steady pull of the modern world. The Hadza are not naive about this. They are aware of what is happening. They are making choices about how much to adopt, how much to keep, how to navigate a world that is changing faster than any society in human history. And they are doing it with 1,000 people. 1,000 people trying to preserve a language that exists nowhere else. 1,000 people trying to maintain a lifestyle that has been tested by 40,000 years of time. So why haven't they collapsed? Why have the Hadza survived when so many other isolated populations have not? When the people of Easter Island collapsed, when the Greenland Norse vanished, when the Tasmanians were reduced to a handful of individuals and lost their cultural continuity. Why are the Hadza still here? The answer, in a strange way, is that their isolation is not absolute. They have always maintained contact with neighboring groups. The Sandawe, their closest genetic relatives, also speak a click language. The Datoga, the Iraku, the Maasai, and various Bantu-speaking farmers live around them. There has always been some intermarriage, some trade, some genetic exchange, but it has been carefully managed, or at least carefully calibrated, to preserve Hadza identity. The Hadza are not a closed system. They are a filtered system. They let in just enough genetic material to maintain health without diluting their identity. That is a delicate balancing act, one that has been maintained for thousands of years, and it may be the single most important factor in their survival. Now I want to ask you something uncomfortable. Could you do it? Could you be part of a population where every major life decision carried that kind of weight? Where falling in love with the wrong person could damage the genetic health of your entire people? Where having a child was not just a personal joy but a collective responsibility? This is what the Hadza live with, not as a burden they speak about every day, but as a background reality. The social rules, the marriage customs, the clan structures, the expectations of elders, the taboos, they all exist to serve this one goal: keep the people alive, keep the blood healthy, keep the language spoken, keep the fire going. And they have done that, generation after generation, for longer than any kingdom, nation, or empire in recorded history. That is not a small achievement. That is one of the great human achievements. And it is happening right now, right this moment, in a scrubby, semi-arid landscape in northern Tanzania, among people who live without permanent houses, without written records, without any of the technologies you are using to watch this video. Let's talk about what the 2017 Skoglund study actually changed in the field. Before that study, the dominant narrative was that sub-Saharan Africa was home to a small number of ancestral populations that gradually differentiated. What Skoglund and his colleagues found was that the pre-Bantu expansion landscape of Africa was far more complex than anyone had imagined. There were multiple deep lineages, multiple hunter-gatherer populations that had diverged from each other tens of thousands of years ago. Some of these lineages are now extinct. Others survive only in trace amounts in the genomes of modern agricultural populations, and a few, like the Hadza, survive as distinct and coherent groups. The picture that emerges is not a simple tree. It is a tangled, ancient, deeply structured web. And the Hadza are one of the last intact knots in that web. When you look at a Hadza person's genome, you are looking at a lineage that split from the ancestors of most other sub-Saharan Africans tens of thousands of years before the pyramids were built, tens of thousands of years before the first cities, tens of thousands of years before the development of agriculture. That is not a gap, that is a chasm, and the Hadza carry it in their blood. There is one more thing, and it's maybe the most important thing of all. The phrase "shouldn't exist" gets used a lot in pop science. It's a hook. But in this case, it is not hyperbolic. From a mathematical standpoint, a population of 1,000 hunter-gatherers, isolated for tens of thousands of years, should have experienced extinction, or at minimum, severe genetic erosion long ago. That they did not, is not a puzzle to be dismissed. It is a puzzle to be studied. Because it reveals something about the limits of our models. Our models assume random mating. They assume uniform selection pressures. They assume that genetic diversity declines predictably with isolation. The Hadza violate all of those assumptions. They show us that culture can act as a genetic technology, that social structures can be as powerful as any tool in maintaining biological fitness, that a small population, if it is smart, if it is careful, if it is disciplined, can survive and thrive in conditions that our models say are impossible. That is a lesson that matters for all of us. In a world of climate collapse, pandemics, and genetic bottlenecks, the Hadza's survival strategy is not a curiosity, it is a masterclass. Now, close your eyes for a moment, if you can. Imagine yourself again in that world. The late afternoon sun is low over Lake Eyasi. The land is dry and rocky, dotted with baobab trees. You are sitting with a group of elders. They are telling stories in Hadzane, a language of clicks that sounds like no other language on earth. The clicks are part of the words, not decorative. They carry meaning. You listen. You don't understand everything, but you understand the rhythm. Stories about ancestors, about hunts, about the time before the farmers came. Stories about a time when the land belonged to your people alone. The elders laugh, they tease each other. They pass around a gourd of honey beer, and you realize, sitting there, that this is not a fading memory. This is a living continuity. The same click consonants that echo across this small valley have been echoing for perhaps tens of thousands of years. The same language, or a version of it, has been spoken by women giving birth, by hunters returning from the bush, by children learning to speak. You are not watching history. You are inside it. And then you open your eyes and you are you again, watching a video, in another world entirely. That gap between you and them is real, but it is not unbridgeable. Their DNA and your DNA reach back to a common origin. Somewhere deep in the past, our ancestors were one. And in the Hadza, that common origin is visible. They are not another species. They are not an alien culture. They are us, in a form that we have almost completely forgotten. That is what the DNA studies are telling us. Tishkoff's mitochondrial work, Skoglund's analysis of deep population structure, Perry's research on gene expression, Prendergast's reconstruction of the Bantu expansion. All of these studies are pointing in the same direction. The Hadza are one of the deepest surviving branches of the human family tree. Their isolation is real but not total. Their population is small but healthy. Their culture is ancient but adaptive, and their existence is a challenge to everything we think we know about what a human society needs to survive. So when you hear that there are only 1,000 Hadza left on Earth, and that their DNA says they shouldn't exist at all, this is what is meant. Not that they are supernatural, not that they are magical, but that they are statistically improbable, culturally brilliant, and genetically irreplaceable. They have maintained a breeding network that defies genetic collapse. They have preserved lineages that exist nowhere else. They have adapted to diseases that would kill you or me without the right interventions. They have held on to a language and a way of life that spans more than 40,000 years. And they have done it with fewer people than would fit on a single large airplane. That is who they are. That is what their DNA carries. If this made you see them differently, subscribe. There are more stories waiting. Thank you for watching. See you in the next one. Thanks for staying until the very end. Goodbye for now.